Hello and welcome to the Evercade Retreat. My name is G-Joke and today I'm reviewing Tomb Raider on the Evercade. Not the cartridge, just the very first game. I do have a full cartridge review in the works, although it will probably change based on me doing the separate videos. Now for the preamble of stuff that you probably already know. Tomb Raider was released in 1996 for the Sony PlayStation and Sega Saturn. Oh, and there was a DOS version as well. In fact, it actually came out on the Saturn before the PlayStation and on DOS, but it was on the PlayStation where it really struck chord with the audience. Tomb Raider the concept was created by Toby Gard, and I believe he was the lead developer on the project, and obviously is heavily inspired by Indiana Jones. It's a third-person action adventure which leans quite heavily on puzzles, to the extent that even navigating the levels and managing the controls could be considered a puzzle in itself. The plot involves Lara being approached by a mercenary who's working for Jacqueline Natzler, a businesswoman and head of the Natzler Corporation. Lara is hired to acquire a MacGuffin, and after retrieving that MacGuffin, the plot unfolds and Lara goes from location to location, with the plot unfolding as she reaches Atlantis and so on and so forth. Anyway, enough of the history. Let's get on to the game itself. Given when the game came out in the earlier part of the 32-bit era, and before game developers really sussed out how to make 3D action games work properly, it suffers some of the shortcomings of their era. However, given the context of when it came out and the hardware, it was quite a good looking game, although there is plenty of texture warping as was common on the PlayStation. When it came out, I wouldn't say it was the best looking PlayStation game at the time, although it did look good. Although many games did look better, they had smaller environments. Tomb Raider had obviously large 3D environments, and I assume compromises had to be made. And even though the 3D graphics don't really hold up all that well today, they do enough to really set the scene and make you feel like you're, in some old tomb. Although even bearing that in mind, I do fully understand when people say that the graphics of PS1 games haven't really held up. And Tomb Raider visually is very much a product of its time and the hardware. The cutscenes are also very typical of the era. They have their charm, but it's hard to say they look amazing. On the audio front though, it's a different story. While some of the voice acting may not be particularly fantastic, it's not a huge part of the game. Lara's voice is absolutely fine, and most of it is adequate at least, but the sound design as a whole is excellent. The music, what there is of it, is fantastic and is quite memorable. It's used infrequently in-game, but to great effect. On the gameplay front, what most people will struggle with is the tank controls. They seem clumsy and unwieldy at first, especially for those who, are very used to playing things on analog sticks with very sort of smooth, fluid controls. Tomb Raider's tank controls, like I said, feel cumbersome at first and clunky, but once you get used to the controls and learn the nuances of it, and they work very well given the design of the game. Navigating the tombs and environments, as I mentioned earlier, is a puzzle in itself. Essentially, Tomb Raider is very much like a 3D Prince of Persia, before there were 3D Prince of Persia games. And those went in a different direction, eventually anyway. In Tomb Raider you have to be quite methodical and precise with the controls, and mastering them is key to, mastering the game. The combat itself is quite basic, but I think works very well, particularly this first game. With auto-targeting you mainly have to focus on dodging your enemies and staying out of the way, and not falling off a ledge or something while you're fighting. It's not deep or complex, but again, it works given the nature of the game. It isn't combat heavy, at least this first game isn't. There are plenty of puzzles throughout the game, whether it's collecting items or keys to access other areas, moving blocks, flicking switches. There's a good diversity of puzzles here. On the negative side, sometimes you can find yourself wandering around back and forth trying to solve a puzzle or find a specific item or switch, not knowing exactly where you need to go or what you have to do. But as you get further into the game, this will happen less frequently, partly through the design, but also partly through becoming familiar with the design and the puzzle mechanics. Everything in the game is very well structured. Movement is very grid-based, leading to the precision required I mentioned earlier, and that methodical nature carries over to the puzzles and the game design as a whole. There are 16 levels in the game, and each is a separate tomb or adventure in its own right. Even within the individual levels, there are often puzzle sections or an area where you'll solve a puzzle before progressing on to the next area. Each level will take you between half an hour to an hour or maybe just over, but most average around 45 minutes. The game feels very episodic and it really does work in its favour. There's also a whole bunch of secrets to uncover, whether it is hidden treasures or well concealed weapons and extras which might make your life easier. In true sort of Indiana Jones style, the story is pretty much a globe-trotting adventure, which gives you different biomes and environments to explore. And in a game of this length, that variety is definitely needed. It is quite a long game and fortunately doesn't really outstay its welcome, although it does come quite close to the bone. The difficulty ramps up steadily throughout the game, really letting you sort of master the controls and the logic of the puzzles as it steps up the difficulty the deeper into the adventure you get. Some sections do have a distinctly trial and error vibe to them, and playing on original hardware back in the day, these could be quite frustrating due to the nature of the save system. The game uses save crystals, so specific save points, and while these are generally quite well placed, there are some long stretches where you'd have to do quite a lot, and if you die then you're backtracking quite a bit. However, with the Evercade and save states, this is alleviated somewhat. To be fair, I don't really consider this cheating, as the PC version, or the DOS version I suppose, didn't use save crystals. You could save anywhere and that is integrated in later games anyway. Tomb Raider is a game that I finished on the PlayStation back in the day. It was a challenging game because, well, a few levels left me stumped for a while, and guides were not to a penny. I couldn't just go on the internet and look them up. I had to do it the hard way while contending with the save crystals. But finally beating it was very satisfying. Coming back to it on the Evercade, the challenge was still present, but any frustration was largely eliminated by the save states, and having played through the game before, I didn't need to resort to guides. I was actually pleasantly surprised by how much I remembered and how much things came back to me while I was playing it. Bear in mind that I played this game in 1996 and I haven't played it since, unless you count playing a bit of Tomb Raider Anniversary, the remake that came out on the Switch and things like that, and I didn't even finish that because I thought it was pretty much a horrible remake. It looked better, but it lost a lot of what made the game work in the first place, in my opinion. And I just realised I said it came out on the Switch. No, it came out on the Wii. Yeah, a little bit of a difference there. But that remake actually put me off trying out the remasters, because part of what ruined it for me was the controls. Yes, they were technically better and smoother, but I found the tank controls and the grid-based movement are so ingrained to the game as a whole, it didn't really work without them. Plus the other changes they made. Yeah, it looked better, but every other aspect of the game was lessened. But that's a whole tangent and I'm not going to go any deeper into it than that. So, overall opinions on Tomb Raider. It's an excellent 3D cinematic platformer that became a hit for a reason. And it wasn't just for having a sexy female protagonist, although that certainly helped the marketing. I know many people believe the game doesn't hold up very well, and visually, yes, having a remaster makes sense. And many people don't like the controls. But I think ultimately it does hold up. As I mentioned, I think the tank controls and the methodical nature of them goes hand in hand with the methodical nature of the gameplay. Navigating the tombs and the environments is a challenge in itself. It is part of the gameplay. In the later games in the series and the Uncharted games, navigating the environments is so easy. You're essentially just pushing in a direction. There's no real challenge to it. As a result, there's less sense of exploration, less sense of adventure. For the time and the technology, Tomb Raider was groundbreaking, and playing it again almost 30 years later, I was still able to find that sense of adventure. But I do have to admit, having played it at the time, having nostalgia for the game, I do believe helped me bypass the barriers of the controls and the early PlayStation graphics. Now, the other question is, where does this go in my overall ranking of games on the Evercade? Well, it goes straight in at the top. Anyway, that's it for this review. Hope you've enjoyed watching this video, and I'll see you in the next one.